Ferrari just brought 11 new parts to Miami. Leclerc topped practice. Hamilton finished third in the sprint. And Leclerc put the SF26 on the second row of the qualifying grid. On paper, a solid weekend. In reality, something much bigger is hiding underneath those numbers, because the software running Ferrari's energy deployment is not working properly. It is costing them 0.3 on every single straight. So what happens when Ferrari fixes the software and the full upgrade finally shows up on the timing screens? The answer is closer to the front than anyone in this paddock is ready for. If you had asked anyone walking through the Miami International Autodrome paddock after the sprint about Ferrari's weekend, they would have told you it was decent, competitive, probably the third or fourth quickest car overall. They would have completely missed the point. Because the finishing positions are not where this story lives. The story lives in the gap between what the SF26 is doing through the corners and what it is doing down the straights. And that gap is not a car problem, it is a software problem. One that Ferrari knows about, has put a number on, and is already racing to fix. To understand why this matters so much, you have to understand the scale of what Maranello just bolted onto this car. 11 new components on a single car. For a single race weekend, 11 parts is the kind of upgrade drop you see maybe 2 or 3 times across an entire season, and Ferrari chose to bring all of them to Miami at once. They led the entire grid in the number of new components introduced at this race, bringing more new parts than McLaren, more than Red Bull, and more than Mercedes. And every single one of those 11 components is aimed at the same target: corner speed. The front floor is completely reprofiled. This is the section of bodywork ahead of the front axle that shapes how air first enters the underbody channel beneath the car. Ferrari's new front floor cleans up that initial entry point and sends a smoother, more organized stream of air underneath the car. Working alongside it, the floor edge is also new. Think of the floor edge like the gasket on a pressure vessel. It seals the boundary between the flat underbody and the high-energy outside air rushing past the side pods and front tires. If that seal fails, outside air leaks underneath and disrupts the low-pressure zone, generating downforce. Ferrari's revised floor edge is specifically contoured to prevent that leakage at the ride heights the SF26 operates at on circuits like Miami. Deeper underneath, the diffuser is brand new. The diffuser accelerates the air exiting from beneath the car, and the faster that air exits, the harder the ground effect pulls the car into the track surface. In the 2026 regulations, underbody downforce is where the biggest performance gains live. Ferrari's new diffuser geometry is a direct attempt to increase that downforce without adding aerodynamic drag. The rear of the car picks up 4 more new parts. The bodywork around the gearbox casing and rear crash structure has been resculpted to improve how air feeds into the diffuser and rear wing assembly, making sure the new diffuser gets the cleanest possible airflow feed. The rear suspension picks up mechanical changes targeting rear tire stability under load transfer. At Miami, the car is constantly transitioning between hard braking into slow corners, accelerating through medium-speed sweeps, and braking again. The revised geometry keeps the rear contact patch more planted through those transitions. The beam wing and the rear wing end plate have both been redesigned, altering the pressure distribution across the entire rear of the car and managing the vortices that spill off the wing edges for more consistent rear downforce. Every component targeting either more downforce through the corners or better airflow management across the rear of the car. Ferrari is not chasing top speed with this upgrade. Ferrari is chasing the kind of corner performance that wins races. Friday practice is where the first signal drops. Charles Leclerc takes the SF26 out onto the repaved Miami surface, with all 11 new parts fitted for the first time in competitive conditions. All of the simulation and wind tunnel work is theoretical, until the car runs on an actual track, in actual temperatures, with actual tyre behaviour and actual fuel loads. Leclerc builds into the session gradually. Early laps on harder compounds, getting a feel for the new balance. Reporting back to the garage on how the rear responds through the low-speed sections. The engineers adjust. Leclerc goes again. The lap times come down, the balance sharpens, and by the time the session reaches its decisive phase, Leclerc goes fastest, top of the timing screen. Free practice one at the Miami International Autodrome, and the upgraded SF26 is the quickest car on the circuit. Fastest, clean lap. Representative conditions, clear gap. In a season where McLaren and Red Bull have been trading punches at the front, Leclerc topping a practice session was not the predicted script. This decision, to bring everything to one weekend, seemed small at the time. It was not. The sprint race on Saturday adds the next layer of evidence. Lewis Hamilton starts from the middle of the top 10, 19 laps around the Miami International Autodrome. Sprint races are the purest distillation of raw car pace in modern Formula One. If the car is not fast enough, you do not go forward, period. Hamilton goes forward. He races the SF26 through the pack, carries more speed through the corner phases than the cars he is passing, manages his energy and tyres with the kind of precision that comes from believing in the car underneath you, and crosses the line in third place. That is pace, real pace, demonstrated under racing conditions, against the best drivers on the planet. The sprint is as close to a lie detector test as Formula One offers, and the SF26 passes it. Qualifying confirms it is not a format-specific anomaly. Qualifying rewards one thing: raw single-lap pace. Leclerc puts the SF26 third on the grid. Hamilton qualifies sixth, strong enough to confirm the car has genuine pace, but far enough back to show the deployment issue is biting harder on some laps than others. The software inconsistency is already visible in the gap between the two cars. That is 4 separate competitive sessions across the same weekend, and Leclerc delivers a top 3 result in every one of them. That pattern does not come from a driver overperforming on one magic lap and then fading back into the midfield. Consistency like that comes from a car with genuine, repeatable, underlying speed. And the key word there is repeatable. Whatever the 11 new parts are producing, they are producing it reliably, session after session, lap after lap. And this is where the easy version of the story ends. Ferrari brought upgrades, the car is quicker, solid weekend, move on to the next race. But the easy version is wrong, because when you break the lap apart into sectors and start looking at exactly where on the circuit Ferrari gains time and where it loses time, the picture that emerges is far more dramatic than any finishing position suggests. By basic measurement, the Miami upgrade looks like a modest step forward, but that evaluation completely misses what is happening inside the lap. The corner performance story and the straight line performance story at Miami are contradicting each other, and the straight line story is dragging the overall verdict down in a way that hides the genuine breakthrough happening through the turns. In the corner-heavy sectors of the Miami circuit, the SF26, with its 11 new parts, is matching the pace of the cars that finish ahead of it on track. In several of those sections, it is quicker, genuinely quicker. The low-speed corners that exposed the rear instability problems earlier in the season are now a competitive area. The tight turns where the rear used to wash wide and cost Leclerc and Hamilton precious tenths are now clean, controlled, and consistent. The medium-speed transitions where the car changes direction and loads the outside tyres are more planted than they have been all year. Cleaner downforce flows through the underbody from the new front floor. The diffuser pulls harder, air seals tighter along the floor edge. Rear stability holds through every transition thanks to the revised suspension geometry, and the beam wing and end plate combination delivers consistent rear load at every speed. 11 parts, all working together, all targeting the same thing, and the corner performance data says they are delivering exactly what the engineers designed them to deliver. That is not an interpretation. That is what the sector splits and mini-sector data shows. The problem appears the moment the car points down a straight. On every significant straight-line section at the Miami International Autodrome, the SF26 loses time to the very same cars it matches or beats through the corners. The pattern is visible across every sector breakdown. Gain through the corners, lose on the straight. Gain through the next set of corners, lose on the next straight. It repeats lap after lap, session after session, driver after driver. And the cause has nothing to do with the aerodynamic drag of the new parts. Nothing to do with the combustion engine's peak power. Nothing to do with running too much rear wing angle for Miami's layout. The loss comes from the energy deployment software, the system that controls when and how the electric motor sends its power to the rear wheels on every lap. The electric motor in these 2026 power units now produces close to half the car's total output, a shift we have broken down before on this channel. That balance of power makes the deployment software arguably the most important single performance variable in these new regulations. At Miami, that software is working against Ferrari. The specific issue is called superclipping. In straightforward terms, the energy recovery system is pulling the electric power delivery back on the straights earlier or more aggressively than the deployment map should allow. The battery is not fully spending its available energy across the complete lap. It is being too conservative, holding reserves in the cells when those reserves should be converting into kilowatts at the rear axle. When deployment works correctly, the battery empties its available charge across the full lap in a carefully shaped curve, pushing hardest out of slow corners and sustaining output through each straight until the braking zone. The battery finishes the lap with almost nothing left in reserve, every joule spent, every kilowatt deployed where it does the most good. What is happening on the SF26 at Miami is the opposite. The deployment map is cutting the electrical output short on the straights. The battery is reaching the end of each lap, with energy still in the cells that should have been used. The electric motor tapers off before the car reaches the braking zone, and Ferrari bleeds speed at exactly the points on the circuit where every other car is still pushing at full electrical boost. The data from the sprint confirms what the telemetry traces were already screaming. The software is not working properly. 3/10 gone on the straights. From software telling the power unit to hold back when it should be pushing at full deployment. And the car is paying for it at the exact points on the circuit where the time loss is most visible and most costly. If you are wondering how 3/10 disappears that cleanly on a straight, consider the maths. 3/10 spread across the straight line sections at Miami translates to the car being roughly 1.5 to 2 car lengths behind at the end of each straight compared to where it should be. Over an entire Grand Prix distance, that compounds dramatically. It means overtakes into braking zones that do not quite stick because the closing speed is slightly too low. It means qualifying laps that end up 2 or 3 grid slots lower than the car's cornering pace actually deserves. And no, that is not a rounding error. 3/10 at this level of Formula One is the difference between pole position and 5th on the grid. 3/10 from a software calibration, not from a fundamental car design limitation, is both the most frustrating and the most encouraging deficit a team can have. Frustrating because the pace is right there, trapped behind lines of code. Encouraging because code can be rewritten. Pay attention to this detail because it explains everything about Ferrari's actual competitive position right now. Strip the straight line deployment deficit out of the lap time data. Look only at the cornering phases. Calculate where the SF26 sits if the software delivers the energy it should. The car is not third quickest. It is not fourth quickest. In the corners, where the 11 new parts do their work, this Ferrari is matching the absolute pace of the cars at the very front of the grid. The upgrade delivered exactly what Maranello targeted. The only thing preventing all of that from showing up in the final classification is a deployment map that cuts the power too early on the straights. While the paddock focuses on finishing positions at the Miami International Autodrome, the wider reality of the 2026 season is that every single team on this grid is fighting the exact same fundamental engineering challenge. The electric motor produces so much more power under the new regulations that the software managing its deployment has become the most complex technical problem any of these teams face. The deployment system makes hundreds of decisions per lap, adjusting for tyre grip, fuel weight, ambient temperature, and the aerodynamic effect of the car ahead. Getting all of those variables optimized simultaneously is not a one-update fix. It is a continuous, race-by-race refinement process that every manufacturer is still working through. The teams that are winning races right now are not necessarily the teams with the best hardware. They are the teams whose deployment software is closest to optimal. 2 cars with identical peak power can produce completely different lap times based purely on how their deployment maps are calibrated. What makes Ferrari's position at Miami different, and genuinely more encouraging than the headlines suggest, is the clarity of the diagnosis. Ferrari knows exactly what the problem is. They can see it in the telemetry. They can measure the 3/10 on the straights. They can trace it to specific conservatism in the deployment algorithms. And they can calculate, with engineering precision, what the lap time should be once the software is corrected. That is not guesswork, that is data. And a problem you can measure is a problem you can fix. The pace is there. The sector analysis shows a car that belongs at the front when you isolate the cornering phases. This is not a problem that needs a new front wing from the factory, not a regulation clarification or a fundamental redesign of the car concept. This is software, algorithms in a deployment map. The computational infrastructure Ferrari has in Maranello, the simulation tools, the validation processes, all of it is designed for exactly this kind of problem. The question is not whether the fix arrives, the question is how fast. And how many championship points Ferrari leaves on the table between now and then. Every race weekend with the current deployment calibration is a weekend where the SF26 finishes lower than the hardware deserves, lower than 11 new parts from Miami earn. Consider the championship table. Leclerc is already qualifying inside the top 3. Ferrari is already producing sprint podiums, already showing race pace that holds up across long stints on multiple tyre compounds. All of that is happening with 3/10 per lap, locked away in a software map that is not deploying correctly. Recover those 3/10 and the grid position changes. The race strategy changes. The cars Ferrari is fighting change. The conversation about whether this is a championship contender or the best of the rest changes completely. Think about what 3 recovered tenths actually does to a race weekend. In qualifying, where gaps between the top 5 are often measured in hundredths, 3/10 is the difference between the second row of the grid and the front row. It is the difference between starting behind a car and starting ahead of it, controlling the first corner, setting the pace. In the race, 3/10 per lap over a full Grand Prix distance adds up to over 17 seconds across 57 laps. That is a pit stop window. That is the margin between an overcut working and an overcut failing. And the deployment fix, when it arrives, does not just add 3/10 on a single lap and then disappear. It compounds across the entire race. Better. Deployment means better speed on the straights, which means better overtaking opportunities, which means better track position, which means cleaner air and more strategic flexibility. Ferrari is not just leaving 3/10 on the table. Ferrari is leaving an entire alternative race result on the table. The European season is approaching, but the underlying truth remains the same at every circuit on the calendar. The SF26 has more pace in it than the results currently show. And the moment the energy management software catches up to the aero and mechanical platform underneath it, the gap between where Ferrari finishes and where Ferrari should finish closes to zero. Which, looking at it from the outside, makes Miami one of the most quietly important weekends Ferrari has had all season. Not because of the result on the timing screen, because of what the result does not show. The car underneath the finishing position is faster than the number suggests. And the gap between where Ferrari is and where Ferrari should be is not a design problem or a concept problem or a resource problem. It is a calibration that Maranello's engineers can fix with better code and more track data. The upgrade worked. The car is faster in the corners than it has been all season. The software has not caught up to the hardware yet, and that is costing 3/10 on every straight, masking the true pace of a car that is closer to the front than the results suggest. And the rest of this grid is not looking closely enough at the sector times to see what is coming when the SF26 finally runs at full deployment. The fix is not a question of if, it is a question of when. And when it arrives, the car that showed up in Miami with 11 new parts and a software problem becomes a car with 11 new parts and no excuses.